Welcome to Season 2 of the Leopard Podcast. This season, I speak with visionary lodge owners operating in Africa's most remote and pristine regions. Get ready for tales of deep commitment to conservation, extraordinary wildlife, and the dedication it takes to run a lodge at the edge of the world. Today, my guest is Tina Plattner from Kamba, Africa. I'm so excited to welcome you to the podcast, Tina. I returned from Odzala only a few months ago, and I had the most incredible, I would say life-changing experience there. What you've done in the Republic of Congo at Odzala is just utterly amazing. So I'm very excited to talk about this topic. It's my favorite topic of the year. So let's dive into it straight away. Can you tell us a little bit about how Kamba started and how it's going, and what is the purpose driving the organization today?
First of all, thanks for having me, Diana. I'm really excited about being here today, so thanks for that. And then, yes, how did Kamba come about? My mom, the founder of Kamba, she got involved with an organization called Leadership for Conservation in Africa in the early 2000s. And they were looking for investors for these public-private partnerships to protect areas in Africa. And they traveled to all kinds of countries, to Zimbabwe, Malawi, Botswana, and everywhere she said, no, this is nice, but it's not for me. It's nice, but it's not for me. Then in 2007, they went up to the Congo, the Republic of Congo, not the Democratic Republic of Congo, where Odzala-Kokoua is based. And they basically drove to what's now known as Mboko camp. There was still an old research station in the park at the time. And they got on pirogues from there, those wooden cutout canoes that you've probably seen on the rivers that the rangers still use. And they paddled up the river, and they had a drum of live chickens and raw peanuts with them, because that was the best way to keep the food fresh. And I think a day or two into the trip, she turned around to the person behind her and said, I'm going to do whatever it takes to help protect these forests, because they remind me of the area where I grew up in Germany, an area called the Black Forest. And that's how the idea was born. So this group traveled back to South Africa, and then my mom said, well, she's a primary school teacher. She said, I would really love to get involved in teaching children and doing early childhood development. So she started founding some schools around the park, and by now we actually run 8 primary schools around the park. But then people said to her, well, Sabina, you can't just do education. Where are the people going to work if they're educated and they got nowhere to go? What should we do? And that's how the tourism idea was born. Because the only way to make money around Odzala at the time was either bushmeat hunting or mining or logging. And yes, that's where the tourism idea came from. She also on a later visit met Magdalena Bermejo, who was the local primatologist who at the time had lived, I think, for over 15 years in the forests of the Congo already. She's a little bit for the Western Lowland Gorillas what Jane Goodall was for the chimps. And yes, they then agreed that some of Magda's gorillas could be habituated for tourism. And that's how it came about. The 3 camps that we now have, Ngaga, Lango, and Mboko, were then designed and started operating in early 2012. There was obviously a 3 or 4 year delay, not only from building, but there were a lot of agreements with the government that had to be signed, MOUs that we could get the concessions in the park, because this was very much a first for the Congolese government at the time. So we've now been open since 2012. We were initially operated by an outside operator. Around 2015, 2016, we've taken the operations in-house, and we now run them as Kamba. Some people might still know the original name of the company. It used to be called Congo Conservation Company, CCC. Kamba is the same company. We just rebranded 2 or 3 years ago, because we think Kamba really speaks about who we are and what we are. It means elephant in one of the local languages. So you'll often hear the trackers in the forest. When you come up to elephants, they'll say Kamba, Kamba. And in one of the other 2 tribal languages in the Republic of Congo, it actually means leader. Mm-hmm. And we really see ourselves as a leader in ecotourism in the Republic of Congo.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's so pioneering. Your mom is a complete legend for going into such an unknown place and building a tourism product that just didn't exist before. So let's talk a little bit for the listeners about what unique experiences people can have in Odzala-Kokoua, or what makes the destination just such an incredible, remote, out of this world destination?
So I think the Republic of Congo is part of the big Western Central African rainforests, which is the second biggest rainforest after the Amazon in the world. So I think that in itself is, you get that real rainforest experience that people usually go to the Amazon for. We have lots of rivers, lots of walking, marshes, peats, all those types of things. And then we have the 3 different lodges in very strategic locations due to the different experiences one can have. So in Ngaga Lodge, the lodge where guests usually go first, is where we have habituated gorillas, where guests can then obviously do the gorilla tracks in very small groups. We only have 4 guests per gorilla track, a tracker and a guide. So it's very small and intimate. And the guests actually leave on foot from the lodge. It's not that one has to go drive in a car to the park. They're really in the habitat of the gorillas already. We've had it last time I was in the Congo, the gorillas actually came to the camp and we were sitting on the main deck looking down on them walking through the camp. And obviously on the same location, we have 3 habituated groups. So all 12 guests can always be accommodated because all 12 permits get issued to us. And we also have quite a large number of wild gorillas in the area. So some guests actually get lucky that they manage to see wild or bump into wild gorillas on the way to the habituated gorillas. Obviously all safe. Gorillas are very shy animals. So they bark, shout, and then they move off. Then Lango, the second lodge, is at a clearing in the forest. So while the gorillas are deep in the jungle, this forest clearing has salt leaching into this clearing from little rivers, and that attracts elephants and buffalo and bongo and different antelopes. So overlooking that, one gets to see a different part of the rainforest, really how the water comes together and how the marshes and peatlands work. And we do a lot of walking activities there to really feel what these forests feel like. And then Mboko is in a more of an open area, a savannah area, from where we do a lot of our boating, the morning and evening boating trips. We have elephants come through camp. We often have hyenas around, buffalo. And then on the rivers, obviously, hippos, they're tiny little slender-snouted crocodile, all those types of things. And also what one sees on the rivers a lot are often monkey species because they're above, the trees grow above the rivers. And we have 17 different species of monkeys in Odzala-Kokoua, which is very special. And maybe just to finish off, I think the last important part about Odzala-Kokoua is that the park itself is about half the size of the country of Rwanda. And us and APN, the park management, are currently the only lodge operators inside the park. So anyone who comes to us, we have 12 beds per camp. And that's the max number of guests that we will have in a park the size of half the country of Rwanda. And there are only 70 kilometers of road within the park. So everything else is done on foot or by boat. And I think that also just thinking about that size makes it a very special destination to travel to, because one can really go home and say, I've been to a place where not a lot of people have been yet.
I totally felt that when I was there. I felt, especially when you fly in over the rainforest and you just look down and there's just trees and rivers and there's no cities or big buildings that you can see, and you land in the middle of nowhere, you feel, I guess you would feel like you might feel in Antarctica, just in a world apart from what you used to. Everything is different. The climate, the plants, the animals, the birds were just so amazing there. So I strongly agree that it's such a place where very few people have managed to go and probably will go, if you think about the size of it and the few number of tourists that are actually visiting at any one time. So let's talk a little bit more about the gorilla experience, because I know that's on so many people's bucket list. And I'll just briefly share my first gorilla encounter, and then I'd love to hear what your first gorilla encounter is. So here we're talking about Western Lowland Gorillas, different from the gorillas that you find in Uganda and Rwanda, which are mountain gorillas. So we headed out on there was a light rain. We didn't even feel the rain, but the raindrops were falling on the trees of the on the leaves of the Mariantezi. And our guide, I still remember him, Sherry Yee, he was having a bit of a tough time because the trackers often use their ears to listen for the gorillas. With the sound of the rain, we couldn't hear very well. But we caught a glimpse of a Western Lowland gorilla in the path up ahead. He just stepped onto the path, looked at us for about 10 seconds, and then headed off. And it was just so ephemeral, like this ghost. And I thought this is going to be our only gorilla sighting. But we ended up having fabulous sightings of Jupiter descending a tree, which is just incredible to see this huge, enormous gorilla coming down a tree, so agile. And we had a great encounter with Neptuno. So yeah, that was my experience of the gorillas in Odzala. What was your first encounter like?
So I saw the gorillas the first time before we had built the camp. So I still went out with the research crew at the time, and we had a different access route to the gorillas at the time, which was a little bit harder than it is now. It's become a lot easier with the grid that's in the forest that one can use with the slightly pre-made paths that the researchers use. So we had one of those, we walked and walked and walked and walked some more, and it wasn't drizzling, it was quite a warm day. We had driven in from Mboko camp at the time, so we started very late. Instead of doing it early in the morning when it's still cool, and obviously the gorillas had moved off, so I had this feeling of I was just going through this forest without an end, and the tracker would always say, they're just here, they are just here. And then we could sometimes hear something I had no idea what he was looking for, but he had always, like you say, he had his ears out and he was looking at things on the ground. And then I actually thought, okay, I might not see a gorilla today, but let me enjoy this experience of how he's actually finding the path and trying to see what he can see and really tracking. And then I noticed he looked at fruit that was eaten and obviously looked at how long ago it had been eaten and broken branches. And then we had a very similar, when we finally found them, we had a very similar experience to you, that they were quite high up in the trees, because obviously compared to the mountain gorillas, they're quite agile, so they do tend to go high up in the trees. And then, but it was just to stand there and hear them suddenly and think, how did this tracker actually find them? Because they at some point started moving through these higher parts of the trees. And as much as we had seen them, the next thing they had just kind of moved off, and we really struggled to follow them through the thicket because they were just obviously moving across the top. But that encounter was enough for me to want to go back and go back again and go back again. And I think one of the things that's special about Kamba that we offer is that, because the gorillas can be high up in the trees, that we offer the guests 2 or 3 gorilla tracks per trip, depending on if they come 7 or 10 nights. Just to make sure that everyone does get a good encounter with the gorilla groups in case one of the first ones might only be a short glimpse. There's obviously the best encounters is when one meets them in the root mining sites. Those encounters are just incredible because they're on the ground, they're pulling roots and insects out of the ground. There are often interactions between different gorillas. Like I've had one earlier this year where a male gorilla and his family bumped into another male gorilla and they started having a bit of a tussle and a fight, and it got noisy and the whole forest just suddenly got alive, and we were like, are we actually far enough away from this? And then they obviously broke up again.
Amazing.
So yeah, we really try. We can't promise those, but that's why we offer more than one gorilla track on the Kamba trips, to make sure that guests have really good experiences. Sorry.
And I just love that it's also only 4 people. So you've got more than one gorilla trek, but you've also only got 4 people on the trek with you, which is amazing. 4 other guests, 3 guests and yourself, which makes it super personal and exclusive. So to move off the gorillas briefly, because there are incredible other wildlife in Kamba, what are some of the other wildlife species people can expect to see if they visit Odzala and Kamba in particular?
We have a lot of forest elephants. They are slightly smaller than the savannah elephants and have slightly pinkish tusks. You can find them, we meet them quite a lot on the walking or boating safaris, and they usually come around the Lango camp at times. Then we obviously have buffalo. Everything, or most things, are a little bit smaller in Odzala-Kokoua due to the forest. So the forest buffalo are also a bit smaller. We have hyenas, and we often find a hyena den with pups that we can take guests to. We have hippo. We don't see them too often, but sometimes it depends a bit on the water levels. Slender-snouted crocodile. We have 17 different primate species. And primates, all kinds of mustache monkeys. And I don't actually know all the names of them now, but lots of really fun and mangabees, lots of real interesting ones that one can look out for on the walkways and on the rivers, and sometimes in Lango Camp one can see them above those elevated walkways too. And then obviously lots and lots of bird species. So it's really a paradise for birders. They're not always easy to photograph, but there's definitely birds that one doesn't necessarily see in other areas that are very common in Odzala. And then one of my favorites is the anomalure. It's a night active animal, and it looks a bit like Batman lives in Odzala. It's a squirrel that has these skins on its arms, and they basically can fly off the trees for like 18 or 20 or even further meters, and they are the most interesting species to see. So for those, we often offer some night activities around Ngaga, because then one can sometimes see them, and it really looks like a small version of Batman is flying through the forest.
So amusing. We didn't see that, but we saw many of the other species that you mentioned, and species I'd never seen before, which was really exciting for me. I've grown up in Africa, done countless safaris, but we were super lucky to see a bongo antelope in Lango Bai, which was amazing. Just a beautiful antelope, and just seeing him moving through the trees was fabulous. And this thing called a water chevroton, a tiny antelope, which I never knew existed. So just all these amazing, unique animals
and
that
the
you get.
hogs that we also get,
Of course,
the
beautiful.
forest hogs and the giant forest hog, and we get more and more sightings of those too, and they're also quite interesting to look at.
Yeah.
And obviously all the antelope species are also, the little water chevrotons are amazing, aren't they? You've basically seen the smallest one and the biggest one with the chevroton and the bongo.
Yeah, we were lucky, and everyone I guess has their own sightings. So we were just super lucky to see those. Okay, let's talk about the type of person, because our listeners might be listening to this and say, I'm definitely the type of person that wants to go and visit the Republic of Congo and Odzala and Kamba. How would you describe the ideal traveler, or the typical person who would be interested in coming to a place like Kamba?
I think Kamba is really attractive to somebody who's probably been to Africa already. It's maybe done Botswana, done Tanzania and Kruger, and now wants to see a different ecosystem, wants to have a different experience. As I said before, it's obviously a very foresty environment, so it's very different to the bush or the savannah most people are used to. It would need to be an active person. A lot of it is walking. As I said, there are only 70 kilometers of road in the park, so a lot of it is walking or boating. The boating is not hard. We either have engines or it's kayaking downstream, but the walking can often be in slightly wetter footing. Having said that, our oldest guest on site was 86 doing the whole 7-day trip. So we're not restricted for elderly people if they're good on foot and want to do this. And I also think it doesn't need to be the most adventurous person. There's always a little bit of a fear in the word Congo. It's like, why would I go to the Congo? Is that not unsafe? And I think that comes a bit from the conflicts that go on in the DRC. The Congo itself is actually a very safe country. We're an all-female leadership team, and we go Brazzaville, the capital of Congo. We go out to restaurants and bars on our own. We all hop in taxis on our own. It's like $1 or $2 around the whole city. We do that in the middle of the night. So it's a very safe place. And we also find females are quite attracted to travel to Congo. So we actually have all female trips who come. I think the forest has something motherly about it that us females tend to connect with. So yes, you can come if you're a big adventurer, but I think it's not only for the adventurer. But yes, you should have a little bit of Africa experience probably before you come to the Congo.
And just to re-emphasize how safe it was, I also walked around at night in Brazzaville, the capital, and felt completely safe. No one bothered me. It was just really safe experience. And I mentioning female travelers, when we landed in Mboko and got into the car and started driving to Ngaga, and just surrounded by this rainforest, I was just in awe, and I was like, this is a place my mom would love to come. And I'm actually planning a trip for her and a friend of hers, and I really hope they get to do it next year. My mom's 75, turning 76. She'll cope perfectly with it, and I think it will be like an absolutely incredible experience for her, and I feel perfectly safe sending her to the Congo. Okay, so you described at the beginning of the podcast really well the 3 different lodges that you've got, the 3 different locations and the beautiful lodges, and everyone has their favorite. But it must be really hard to operate these lodges in such a remote area. You can't just go to the shop if you've forgotten to buy some eggs, or something breaks and you need to call an engineer. Like, it must be really tricky to run such a complicated operation seamlessly. And it's a very comfortable lodge. Like, all the comforts that you might expect are there. So how do you give guests this incredible, authentic, but comfortable experience in this very remote part of Africa?
I think for that I have to thank the team on the ground, and especially the logistics people, because as you say, logistics is not easy. Everything gets either flown or trucked into the camps from Brazzaville. So we have a truck once or twice a month that comes with all the dry supplies, that comes up with fuel that we have in the camps. We ship containers of goods in from South Africa or Europe to bring goods in, and then obviously often the freshes actually travel on the plane to get the meats and the salads and those things. We travel up. So yes, the logistics is probably one of our biggest challenges in Kamba, and that we worked on hard to get them to as good as they are now, to have the right suppliers, to make sure things are ready for us when we need them, find the right supply chains. Even Brazzaville itself, they manufacture some things on site, so we buy directly from the farm, either in Brazzaville or in the villages, but some of the food does get imported from Europe. So we're obviously trying to keep the imported food for as low as possible. We get very good fish, for example, from Point Noir. Mm-hmm. So guests often say, how do we end up with lobster in Kamba, in the rainforest? We're like, the lobster is from Point Noir. So that's for us, it's a local food. We can offer it fresh. But yes, it's been a bit of a challenge. A good thing is for us that we always have the plane. So the plane flies twice a week. They can bring supplies up. And I think also for the guests to maybe know, the plane always stays in camp when guests are there. So there's always that safety net of being able to get somebody out of the camp if need be. But that's obviously also part of the bigger logistics chain that we run.
Yeah, and just also, by the by, you have an excellent doctor on site. You can deal with anything if needed. So that's good to know. What is one of the most unexpected things guests experience when they arrive at Kamba?
I think a lot of people arrive with a little bit of, maybe not nervousness, but anxiety, because it's such an unknown destination. And I always love it by the time of day 5 or so, when people get to Lango, and now you've walked in the forest a lot, and you walk knee deep or hip deep in a swamp, and you suddenly see how this anxiety falls off everyone. And that day people come back and there's laughing and cheering, and there's this, we call it the inner child comes out again. Everyone finds this person that they've hidden somewhere inside themselves for a long time, and they're like, yeah, I did this. I didn't only go to the Congo, I actually got into the swamps and walked around there like the old explorers did, or how the early humans did who lived in these forests. And I find, to me, that seems to be an experience where a lot of our guests say, wow, that was actually an experience I'll take home that's changed me as a person. It's grounded me, or it's connected me, or I'm closer to my partner again after this. Another one that a lot of guests mention are on foot or on kayak encounters with the elephants. So, for example, like kayaking down the river in a rainstorm, and the elephants just crossing the river right in front of the kayaks, and you basically paddling a bit slower just to see them and watch them. I think that's what people have mentioned that they really love. Obviously, in Kamba, because it is a thick forest, we can't make these experiences. We can't promise them. So some people have them and some don't. But I think those are the life-changing experience people have. And obviously anyone who hasn't seen gorillas before, I think they're very humbled by meeting the gorillas when one meets them the first time. And for me, it's always the hands, looking at their hands, and that they have the same wrinkles on their hands that we do, and the fingernails and how they use them. I think that's also a very special encounter.
Yeah, absolutely. It's heart-stopping when you see a gorilla for the first time. And just to add to the beautiful experience of walking in those swamps, it's something I've never experienced before, and it was so wonderful. And you do feel a bit of intrepidation when you get off the boat or the kayak and you have to step into these murky waters and you think, what's at the bottom of this? But it's actually an incredibly peaceful, spiritual, just beautiful, calm experience walking in those swamps. And I've never experienced anything like it. And I think it was one of the many unique experiences that we've spoken about today. Okay, if you could give a tip to someone who's planning their trip to Kamba now, and they're coming for the first time, what would you say? What should they pack, or what is one travel tip they should bear in mind?
I think one is be open. It's okay to be a little bit anxious. I think that's completely understandable, but be open to what's going to come your way. And be okay with the fact that you might come back changed in one way or another. I think that's just, the Congo does something to people, and Odzala-Kokoua does something to people. It's hard to explain, but everyone who comes back goes, this has done something to me. I think that's on a maybe more spiritual or personal level. From a packing point of view, bring 2 pairs of old sneakers. Your feet will get wet in the Congo. It is a rainforest.
And not the fancy ones, because they just get destroyed.
They get destroyed. Bring
Bring
the oldest sneakers.
And what about, are you able to share with us and with the listeners, Tina, a story from Kamba, perhaps about a staff member whose life was changed, or a guest whose life was changed by being associated with Kamba?
So I think we've now spoken already a bit about guests, and that a lot of them actually say it's life-changing. And we have a lot of guests who actually cry after their first Lango experiences in the swamps, for example, or cry when they leave. I think the nature gives a lot to people, and the Congolese people give a lot to the people. There's a heart-warm atmosphere and a real, genuine will to please that I think one doesn't have in many places anymore. I think that's a big part of the authenticity of what Kamba offers, that the staff is so authentic. And we've gotten there through a lot of training with the staff. We've been bringing in, none of our staff had any hospitality training before. So we've been bringing in trainers from Paris to actually teach them to become waiters, to become barmen, to become even local guides now. We train local Congolese guides because none of them existed before. And through that program, we had recruited a young man from the village. He could read and write, so he came on as a waiter and then a barman. And then we realized that he was very interested in reading the species books, and that he was very good in pronouncing the Latin names. And we started chatting to him, and he said, no, he'd spend a little bit of time in Russia studying. And then his parents ran out of money, so he had to come back home and live in the village because he didn't have a job, and his grandparents had to support him. And we said, do you like this? And he goes, yes. And then we said, well, then why don't you join the guiding team program? So we started training him as a guide. And then when the doctor came on site, we saw he was spending a lot of time with her. And when they had paramedics training, he was very hands-on and said, but you need to do this and this and this. And then we said, what did you actually study in Russia? And he said, no, he had done 1.5 years or 2 years of medicine. So we've now actually, through Kamba and through some of the income we've created, decided to put a bursary for him together. And he's now studying medicine on site next to, while he's working, to hopefully become our first Congolese in-camp doctor once he's finished his studies in 4 years' time. And to me, it's those stories that really make a difference. And that is what the difference the guests make to the country. We've also, we have our first full trained guide who's Congolese, and we currently have 4 more young guides in training to become trained Congolese guides, because we in the long run would like to obviously have more and more Congolese guides in the guiding ranks, same as Kenya and Botswana do.
Yeah, I mean, when you told me that story, I just got goosebumps, because it is amazing how this place can change guests' lives, but staff lives as well. And this is just an amazing opportunity for this young man. Wish him all the best. I'm sure he sounds very diligent and dedicated. I'm sure he's going to do amazingly well. And those stories are just fabulous to bring up, and so that people realize this is where their money's going, just to uplifting staff lives. And speaking about that, what else do guests contribute to preserving this ecosystem of Odzala? By visiting the Congo, they're contributing positively to employment, for example. We've spoken about that, to preserving the gorillas. What are some of the other ways that people leave a positive mark on the Congo when they leave?
So firstly, parts of the fees we charge are obviously conservation, park and community fees. So that comes out and goes to the park management and to the community. And then I think an interesting fact is that Nzehi concession, where Ngaga is located, to camp with the gorillas, is outside the park. So it's not really a protected area. And we are currently lobbying with the government to make it a protected area. And obviously every guest who comes in brings tax income to the government. So that helps us with the lobbying, that there is money to be made with these forests. That doesn't mean harvesting the forest, as in logging or hunting or mining in the forests. Because hopefully in the long run we can make more and more protected areas in these forests. And I think the last and most important one is that every guest who comes and travels back from Odzala to Europe or to America or to Asia or here to South Africa is to take the message back that Odzala exists, that these massive rainforests exist. I've met so many people who don't know that Africa has the second biggest rainforest ecosystem in the world and a massive carbon sink that's so important to help us combat climate change. And so I believe that every guest who comes to Odzala does become a guardian of the forest just by talking about the trip and talking about their experiences.
Oh, no, wonderful. So in closing then, Tina, if our listeners we've given them, I hope, hundreds of reasons to come and visit the Congo and Odzala, if they are interested in knowing more about any aspect of it, whether it's the gorillas, about coming for a trip or donating or whatever they might be interested in, where is the best place for them to go to find out more about Kamba?
I believe on our website, that would be www.kambaafrica.com. Kamba Africa, just one word with 2 A's.
Yeah, Kamba.
Kamba, exactly. Thank you for that.
As you pronounce it. Thank you so much for being on the podcast, Tina. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you and reliving that time that I had in the Congo. It's been just a fabulous discussion. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening. Leopard specializes in curating extraordinary journeys. Get in touch with us to help you plan the trip of your dreams.